right, who has ever put an application on Heroku? I have lots of little things on there. Apparently, I didn't know, I forgot about them, and then they started sending me emails saying we're about to take them down. I thought, well, whatever. But I still have some good ones. So you are at the content of the next talk. I think that's very recursive, that, this is about you. And a whole bunch of really interesting things about both, what they do, and also some philosophical and methodological, I can't even say the words, some ideas for you. That's a much shorter word. Let's stick to little words. Not for your benefit, but for me. So please put your hands together for Richard Shneeman. Damn it! I got it wrong. All right, stop. Just stop. You wait for a second. How do I say your last name?
Shneeman.
Shneeman. All right, go back in there. All right, go back. So how about that weather? Please put your hands together for Richard Shneeman. Yes!
Hello. Welcome back from coffee. I hope some of you got some coffee. I hear there's some long lines. So, my name is Richard Shneeman. Shneeman is German for snowman. A fun little tidbit. On Twitter, I go by Schneems, and in the U.S., a lot of people have problems pronouncing that. So it's kind of like Schnauzer or Schnapps, whichever you prefer. So some people might say that I'm married to Ruby. Other people will literally say that I'm actually married to Ruby. This is a picture of my wedding in April, and that's my wife. So yeah. A picture of my dog. This is Hans Peter von Wolf, the fifth, and he is actually a fifth. Believe it or not, not biologically, just by name only. It's a long name because he's a long dog. So I've written a couple of different libraries. I've written the Sextant Gem, which is Rails routes inside of your browser. It's also now part of Rails 4, which is pretty cool. You can spin up localhost 3000/Rails/info/routes, and boom, you've got your routes. You'll love it. I kind of feel like that guy on TV that tries to sell the slap chop with this little microphone. So you're gonna love it. All right. I've also got a gem called Wicked, which you might have used. It's for creating step-by-step controllers, useful for doing things like after sign-up, wizards really. And most recently, I've written a project called Code Triage, which so in the U.S., triage is something if you go to a hospital. Instead of just sending you to the first doctor available, they send you to someone who says, all right, are you sick? Is your arm broken? Which doctor should you even be going to? And that person will then say, oh, okay, here, you need to see this doctor. So the doctor can be focused on their specialty the entire time. So in the open source community, I noticed this big problem where we have issues. Like, literally, we have hundreds of Rails issues that are just open, and we have maybe 4 or 5 or 6 people who are actively looking at them. So codetriage.com uses the most evil of evil communication technologies, email. I think Jeremy was claiming that to be, and sends you 1 issue a day in your inbox. It's a particularly long introduction. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Texas, and if you know anybody looking to learn Rails or Ruby, I've got source material on schneems.com/utrails. Okay, so I work for Heroku. It's a small company some of you might have heard of. At Heroku, I have a title, I work at the Ruby Task Force, and in the Ruby Task Force, I am, in fact, a Ruby Task Force member. Yes. We have Ruby Task Force meetings and Ruby Task Force managers. You get the point. This is one of my coworkers. You might recognize him from a previous talk. This was taken at RubyConf last year. I don't know the other 2 individuals in the picture. Okay, so the talk is entitled "Millions of Apps." What we learned, and so what did we learn? We tried to kind of take all of this experience of running all of these different applications and distill them into a core methodology. So a set of easy to understand principles that we could just kind of give to you, and you could take them, and your code will be better, and you'll be happier people, you'll be more productive, you'll be working smart and hard. So without further ado, we've got code base, dependencies, config, backing services, build, release, run, process, port, binding, concurrency, disposability, dev prod, parity, logs, admin processes. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? Okay. Well, I'll just stand. Okay, so in reality, I want to talk a little bit about, instead of going through those, I want to talk about what is good in Rails and Ruby and some things that could be a little bit better. So we're going to kind of just focus on the takeaways. First, I'd invite you to please close your laptops, which it's actually, I'm really impressed by this crowd in general. Like, you guys have been really good about paying attention and good engagement, so good work, kudos. Of course, if you're commenting on Rails issues or signing up for codetriage.com, you can keep your laptops out. That's the catch. Now I should see laptops opening more. It's okay. All right. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is security, and this is pretty big. Specifically, I want to talk about cross-site request forgery, or CSRF. Now, before the whole the words YAML and security became entwined, CSRF was one of the most common types of security vulnerabilities brought up inside of Rails. And this is not a Rails-specific problem. This is a problem with any kind of language, any kind of framework, anytime you're dealing with requests, with secure web requests. So specifically, inside of Rails, we have a config.security token, and this is a token that needs to be unique inside of your application, and you should not be sharing it. So one way to think of it is it's the key to your digital kingdom. Just to conceptualize for a second, I would like to ask you as a thought experiment, if you have a car or maybe apartment keys, would you just make copies of those keys and hand them out to your interns, or perhaps your contractors that you're working with? What about maybe the open source contributors you've got? So maybe not. You might want to hold on to those keys. Come back to some wild house parties or something. So if your secrets are in your source code and you've given your source code to one of those people, then guess what? They aren't secrets anymore. You've already given them access to all of those different things. So you want to protect your code, and one of the ways that we can do this is by keeping secure keys out of source control, so keeping them out of Git. Like if somebody has access to your repository and they pull it down, if they move on to another position, you don't want to say, oh man, do I have to roll all my keys now? Like that's pretty bad. So one alternative to storing all these different variables inside of Git is to use environment variables. So environment variables we've been using a lot. We're really used to them as Rails developers. If you ever run like Rails env equals test, like that is an environment variable. That's setting it. It's passed into the process. Everything on the system in that process can access it. And this is what it would look like actually setting that config secret token via an environment variable. And this is actually source code taken from rubygems.org. If you've ever visited rubygems.org, the entire web app is all in Rails, and it's all open source, which is pretty cool. You can just download the entire rubygems.org website and run it on your own, but you can't hack into it because you can't see what the secure token is. It's pretty secure. So this is a great way where we can basically tell our system, hey, here's your token that you're running on right now. You will notice maybe there is a fallback, which is not so secure, so definitely you need to set that environment variable, which leads me to my next logical question, which is how do I even set these environment variables? How do I deal with this? In development, I like using a file called .env file, and you store this at the root of your project directory, and you do not check this file into source control. Whenever you cat it, it's going to look just something kind of like this. If you want to run a specific Rails environment, you could put Rails env equals development or that type of thing. Anything you put in here is basically just environment variable equals value. And then we can use some helper gems, such as the .env gem. And what this will do, it'll actually load in that .env file and put everything in there into your environment. It looks something a little bit like this. You can just call .env.load, and then you get direct access to those environment variables. So whatever we had in our .env file is now going to be accessible via environment variables secure token. Another good option, or another good alternative I've used is foreman. So foreman will allow you to declare multiple processes and start them up all at once. It also sources from a .env file if it's available. So you can use foreman run and then whatever kind of command you want, and it'll go ahead and load that .env file for you. Or if you are running multiple processes, then you can just call foreman start, and you're good to go. In production, obviously, I wouldn't be recommending this if we didn't have some capacity to really make use of environment variables. At Heroku, we have the concept of configuration. So you can just do Heroku config add, and boom, you've got your environment variables right there. And the nice thing is, it's different for every single app and different for every single developer. So it is actually secure. If you're using something like a VPS, you could directly use foreman or maybe .env. You could add it to your bash RC if you're only running one app per box, or you could add the values directly to the command, though that would be a little bit cumbersome. So another question people commonly ask is, what if somebody can read my environment variables? And chances are, if they can read your environment variables, they can probably read your files too. So I don't know, it's sort of a wash in terms of security there. And a thought experiment you can perform right now, right this very second, is my app open sourceable? If somehow somebody went into my organization and just made everything public, am I okay? Or would I be opening myself up to massive attacks? Brian is going to be speaking later on for CodeClimate, and they also run a security tool that you can run against your code, and it will warn you against some various security things. But just as a good mental exercise, if you can't open source your app and be protected, then that's kind of a problem. And this is just one example. Like, we use these types of things all over our applications, and we refer to them as configuration. It's not necessarily always going to be just those secure cryptographic things, but so resource strings to database. You've seen the database.yaml file. You've probably used S3 credentials, Twitter credentials, Facebook credentials, canonical values. And like, if you find yourself saying, oh boy, I need to change my bucket name to S3, I'm going to deploy my app. That's okay. But if you have to deploy your app to change your S3 bucket name, like, that's probably not the greatest thing in the world. Also, like, I have worked at many places that just had a massive file of secrets, and this is just like one YAML file that they don't check in or something along those lines, and you end up just having every single developer's Facebook credentials and secret tokens, access tokens. But don't do that. Just all you have to do is use environment variables. So config, it's going to be the interface between your platform and your code. And just remember, it does take a little bit of practice to say, all right, next time you think, oh, where am I going to store this? I'm going to put this in a YAML file and check it in. It's like, no. Just because it works does not mean it's necessarily a good practice. So please keep the config separate from your code. And whenever we do this, it's going to give us a couple of really nice features. At Heroku, we use this to power something we call release management. It actually gives us the ability to independently version not just your deploys, but also all of your variables. So you can see here that on V101 we deployed, but on V102 we rolled our security token. So if your app suddenly quits working and everybody in the company is like, hey, we didn't change anything, chances are something changed, right? So being able to keep a log of that is pretty critical. It powers rollback, and by doing this, it also is the feature which allows us as a platform to offer add-ons. So add-ons are those things like Redis or Memcache that we don't necessarily provide for you directly, but you can go and you can provision yourself. You can just run Heroku add-ons add, and then you get that value. And what this actually does, it gives that company the ability to add a environment variable to your code base and restart your app without having to deploy anything, without having to change anything. And it's pretty safe, it's pretty secure, and it's really useful. So then once you have that there, you can just go ahead and use it directly in your environment variable or directly inside of your code. So in this situation, we're actually pulling out a URL for a CDN, and it's that simple. So in this case, we're actually treating our add-ons as these attached resources. Okay, am I going a little too fast? Is this all right? Okay, cool. Got some thumbs up. So the next thing I really want to talk to you about is development versus production. Who here is using Postgres in production? All right, yeah, awesome. I love Postgres. But is anybody developing in Mongo, and then deploying to Postgres? Did that make sense? Did anybody's head just explode when I said that? That makes no sense. So why would you develop in SQLite 3 in development and then push to Postgres? So dev prod parity is the attempt at keeping your development machine in sync with your production machine in as many ways as possible that really makes sense. So just some things to watch out for are data stores. If use Postgres, use Memcache, make sure you're using the same versions of those, same language versions, Ruby 1.9, Ruby 2.0. And one other thing I actually think is really neat for developing features, especially if you're working with some people who are doing prototyping and kind of just like stubbing out new features, is real and consistent data. So we give you the ability to just take a snapshot of your production database, and then you can pull it down to your local database. Before you do this, you might want to double check with the type of data you have. If you're working with healthcare or something like that, you might not want to do that. You might also want to scrub emails or personal info or something. I've been in teams where we've worked with really small scripts that'll do this for us. But then once you've done this, you have all of the data on your local machine that looks exactly and behaves exactly like real user data. With the really nice thing is, as you're building these features, you're building the UI, you're building all of this, it's actually powered by not just guessing how the users are going to be using your system, but really showing you how. So another thing that I personally advocate is dev parity, and this is something that as developers, we've been kind of increasingly interested in recently with all of the scripting of development environments and setting up. But even with that, even if you've got your entire company running on Puppet or Vagrant or whatever, whatever you do not overlook your README. This is the one thing that if I come into your company right now, I should be able to take a look at your README and get started. You know, maybe there's a couple of things that need to be updated. My first task working on any kind of new project, even if it's an open source project, is just updating the README. If I had problems, if I ran into any bugs, you know, maybe I need to declare some versions. Just use it as a way to standardize the development environment. And even if it just says, grab this Vagrant image and run Vagrant up, having that in a common place that everybody can look to and everybody can say, this is the canonical place to store that information is just absolutely crucial. One way I think of this is using it to actually scale developers. And you know, there are definitely lots and lots of READMEs inside of the world, but take pride in yours. It might seem, even if you're just one developer today, trust me, whenever you come back to this project in 5 years and you're gonna be like, oh man, how do I set up all of this? Like, you're definitely gonna thank yourself. Some people do like writing scripts, or they do want to run a script that will just do all of that for you, and they'll have a consistent script, but in my opinion, my experience, that's not enough. Or, you know, who maintains the script? If everyone maintains the script, that's totally fine. It's not nearly flexible enough. Okay, does anybody in the audience have any performance problems? It's okay. You're in a safe place. Well, I'm very accepting, but I will tell you that you're wrong. You don't have any performance problems. It's okay. What you have are visibility problems. There's a wonderful developer by the name of Ryan Smith who coined this phrase. I love it. There are no performance problems, only visibility problems. Otherwise, if you knew what was slow, why wouldn't you just make it faster? So, you know, that sounds like a great idea, but I'm running this, you know, massively scaled, you know, multiple like distributed server. How do I actually get into my system and find out what is slow? So for application visibility, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need to be distributed. It's going to need to be fault tolerant. Low overhead. You don't, you know, if you're worried about performance, you're worried about visibility, you don't want to make things slower, of course, while you're trying to find these things out. And at the end of the day, you need basically streams of data. You just want data about your entire application, about everything you're doing. So I suggest, as a solution, maybe we can use this with this and add on a little bit of some of that. And something else maybe, or, wait for it, logs. Okay, so this is one of those things where it almost sounds like, really? Like, that just sounds insanely simple. Like, I'm already using logs. Like, those are the things I just check whenever something's down or you know. Really, it fits all of those requirements. It's essentially just streams of data from your application, and we can definitely use it as more than that. We can use it to do different things like measure metrics. So here is an interesting project by the same gentleman who gave us that quote previously called L2Met, and if you emit your measurements in a certain style, then in a certain format, then it will automatically pull those out and automatically graph them for you and make it so that you have taken that distributed set of data and now it is in kind of one place. In addition to being able to pull out those types of, well, of course, then you have to go through and actually instrument your application. That's maybe a much more in-depth talk with, if I had a little bit more time, we could go into that.